Have you ever been inside a mausoleum after dark? I don't mean walking past it or standing outside during a ghost tour. I mean really inside it, locked in, breathing the same stale air that hasn't moved in decades, hearing your own heartbeat echo off cold stone, feeling something you can't explain watching you from the shadows. What would you do if you weren't alone in there? My name is Thomas Whitmore. I've been a cemetery groundskeeper for over 30 years. People think they know what that means. Digging graves, mowing lawns, maybe the occasional late-night burial for privacy's sake. But there's another side to this job. One no one talks about. One they don't warn you about when they hand you the keys. I've been carrying this inside me for almost 8 months now. 8 months of silence, of pretending it was all just a bad night. But it wasn't. It wasn't. It wasn't. I've tried to convince myself that what I saw, what I heard, what I felt down there, that it wasn't real, that it couldn't have been. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard, and I know what tried to speak to me from inside that stone crypt. This is not a story I'm proud to tell, but it's one I can't keep buried any longer. Let me take you back to that night, to the eastern wing of Millfield Cemetery, to the Brenning family mausoleum, and to the night I learned that not every corpse lies still, and not every whisper inside the walls is from the wind. The mausoleum stood at the far edge of Millfield Cemetery, tucked between a line of weather-worn crypts and an overgrown grove of yew trees. Most visitors never even noticed it. No fresh flowers, no footprints in the dust, just a squat limestone structure with a bronze plaque that read, Brenning Family, 1881. There were no current descendants I knew of, no recent burials and no records of anyone visiting it in decades. We had over 140 acres to tend to in that cemetery, military plots, children's gardens, marble monuments crumbling under ivy. But that building, it had its own gravity. I'd walk a different path just to avoid looking at it. The windows were stained glass, but blackened with soot from the inside, as if something had burned long ago and the glass had simply swallowed the smoke. The inside was simple rows of sealed crypts, names etched in faded gold, the air still and thick like velvet. But what unsettled me most was the central chamber, a circular alcove where the ceiling rose into a narrow dome, painted with angels that had lost their faces to time. There were no light. The only illumination came from a thin, waxy candle someone had left on a pedestal, burned all the way down as if it had been lit recently. But who would have lit it? No one had the key but me. I had just returned to work after a shoulder injury. That night was my first shift back. We'd had trouble with some local teens breaking into party in the older crypts, so the city asked for overnight surveillance until repairs could be made to the iron gates. I volunteered. I thought I was ready. 32 years of experience made me cocky. I figured it would be quiet, maybe boring. My supervisor, Dale, gave me the key and a pat on the back like he was handing me a flashlight and saying, "Go catch the boogeyman." He even joked about the Brenning crypt. "Just don't fall asleep in there," he said. "You might not wake up." That mausoleum had a thick metal door that locked from the outside, but for some damn reason they installed a bolt on the inside too. I still don't know why. Maybe to make whoever was trapped feel like they had a choice. It was supposed to be a simple check the locks, walk the perimeter, write a few notes, then rest inside with the door latched. I brought a thermos, a notebook, and an old lantern. I entered the mausoleum just before 10 p.m. The moment I stepped inside, it was like the world closed behind me, like the air outside didn't exist anymore. I turned, slid the bolt closed behind me, and set my lantern down. It should have been just another long night. But then the temperature dropped, and I started to hear breathing. That wasn't mine. At first I thought it was just nerve, the kind of cold that comes from being underground, surrounded by stone. I told myself the temperature drop was expected, but it wasn't. I've sat inside crypts during rainstorms during winter nights. Never felt cold like this. It was sharp, precise, like it came from one direction and moved. I remember checking my watch. It was just past 10:15. I made a note in my logbook. Air is unnaturally cold near northeast wall. I tried to laugh it off, just an old man's imagination kicking in on his first night back. Then I noticed the condensation. My breath was visible in the lantern light, small pale clouds floating in the still air, and they weren't alone. In the beam, I could see other wisps, slight, faint, but they weren't matching my breathing. They were coming from somewhere else in the room. And then, the breathing sound. Low, shallow, like someone lying just out of view, exhaling through cracked lips. I froze, strained my ears, thought maybe the old ventilation shaft in the back wall was open. But when I checked, it was sealed tight with rust and moss. No air movement at all. I stood still, held my breath, and counted. 1 breath. 2, 3, not mine. The candle on the pedestal, remember that one? It was gone. It had been there when I entered, burned to the base. The wick curled like a dead finger. Now nothing, not even a smear of wax. I hadn't looked away. I know I had. My lantern was the only source of light now, and the shadows in the alcove were wrong. I told myself it was just settling. Old stone, old silence. It does things to your head. I said that. I wanted to believe it, but deep down I could already feel it in my gut. That low hum of dread that you can't explain. Then the bolt on the inside of the door clicked, all by itself. It didn't open. It didn't slam shut. It just clicked, like someone on the other side was checking if it was locked. That was the moment I stopped writing notes. I placed the logbook down gently, as if any sudden motion might make whatever was near me aware that I was aware. I turned off the lantern, thinking if I became still enough, quiet enough, maybe it would leave. But that's when I heard the whisper, so close it brushed my ear like breath. It said only one word: Thomas. I didn't move for a full minute after I heard my name. I couldn't. My entire body had gone rigid, every instinct screaming at me to run. But my legs weren't listening. It wasn't just that it spoke, it was how it spoke. That whisper didn't come from across the room or behind a crypt wall. It came from inside my hearing, as if the sound had formed behind my eardrum. When I finally dared to move, I reached for my lantern with a shaking hand and turned it back on. The light flickered weakly, barely cutting through the gloom. I scanned the mausoleum. Nothing had moved. No doors ajar. No footprints on the dusty floor. But I knew what I'd heard. It knew my name. I checked the door. The bolt was still in place. But that didn't comfort me. It terrified me more, because whatever was in here, it hadn't come in. It had always been here. That's when I started looking for answers, not from the outside world, but from within the mausoleum itself. I needed something, anything, to make this make sense. In the back corner, behind a row of sealed niches, I found an old cabinet built into the wall. A rusted drawer, swollen with damp, took all my strength to pry it open. Inside were several moldy record books, burial logs from the 1800s and early. I flipped through them quickly, then stopped cold when I saw a name. Thomas R. Whitmore, born 1891, interred 1936, age 45. That's my full name, my exact name, same spelling, same middle initial, and the age. I stood there, heart pounding, holding a book, older than my grandfather, staring at my own name in faded brown ink. I kept digging. The Brenning family list had 12 entries, 11 coffins accounted for, 1 space empty, marked, reserved. See separate documentation. There was no note saying who it was reserved for, but in a different book, one so decayed it fell apart as I turned the pages, I found a letter tucked between the sheets, dated October 5, 1936. It read, "The 13th space remains sealed by agreement. No further entries are to be made, unless under direct instruction from the family line. Do not disturb what rests beneath. Do not break the circle." No name, no signature, just those words, and something else scribbled faintly in the margin. He will return under the same name when the 13th night comes. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even sit down. I just stood in that mausoleum, lantern flickering, Books spread around me like forgotten prayers, trying to convince myself this was all coincidence, an error, a joke. But when I checked the cemetery's digital archive the next morning, I found nothing. No Thomas R. Whitmore buried in Millfield, no reserved 13th space, no record of a Brenning family at all. The books were real. The digital records had been wiped clean. Someone had erased them. I couldn't let it go, not after seeing my own name in that book, not after hearing it whispered in the dark. Over the next 3 nights, I returned to the mausoleum. Each time, I brought something with me, a camera, a thermometer, my old tape recorder from when I used to catalog interviews for the Historical Society. Each time, the same chill greeted me when I stepped inside, and each time, the temperature would begin to drop only in the center chamber, always near that same pedestal where the candle had first been. I left fresh candles there every night, unlit, just to see. They never remained untouched. The 3rd night, I lit the recorder and left it running in the far corner. I sat in the dark, heart pounding, staring at the center crypt, the one that had no nameplate, just a small brass circle carved into the stone. The circle, I'd noticed it before. It wasn't just decorative. It had markings, faint and looping, almost like a seal. At 2:17 a.m., the lantern went out by itself. No wind, no draft, just darkness. I froze, and in the silence, I heard the breathing again. But this time, it wasn't coming from one place. It was all around me. Soft exhales, like a dozen lungs, slowly inhaling and exhaling in unison. When I listened back to the recorder the next day, I found something that made my stomach turn. From 2:16 to 2:18, there were 3 sounds: a low, wet, dragging noise, the sound of a second breath, right next to mine, and a voice, whispered, faint, female. It said, "Don't let them open it again." I played it back over and over, always the same, always that phrase. I knew I had to find out more. I went to the county records office under the guise of verifying burial permits. That's when I found something that chilled me more than any voice on tape. The Brenning family mausoleum had been sealed twice, once in 1936, and again in 1985. But there were no permits for the second seal, no records of who opened it, just a 1-line note on an old carbon sheet: reinterred by request, door reinforced, chamber 13, permanently sealed by Alan Hart, sexton. Alan Hart. That name rang a bell. He was my mentor. He taught me everything I knew about this job. He died I remember attending his funeral, and now I remember what he said to me once, when we were walking past the old mausoleums, years ago. He pointed to the Brenning crypt and said, half joking, "Don't let anyone ever open that one. If they do, you better run before it remembers who you are." I thought it was just an old man's ghost story. Now I know he wasn't joking. Now I know why the 13th chamber was sealed, and why someone or something wants it opened again. The name Alan Hart echoed in my head for days. He'd trained me, taught me where to find the original keys, how to handle grieving families, even which corners of the cemetery froze first in the winter. But he never mentioned this, never told me he'd been involved in resealing the Brenning crypt. I visited his widow, Clara, a few towns over. She was in her late 80s now, frail but sharp-eyed. When I told her I was working on the east side of Millfield again, her face changed. She set her tea down without sipping. "You've been near that place, haven't you?" she said. I hadn't even mentioned the mausoleum yet. When I nodded, her hands trembled slightly. He swore he'd take it to the grave. Said it wasn't his to speak about. Said it was buried for a reason. She looked away, then back at me. "Did he leave you the key?" "The key? There's a second one," she said. "He kept it hidden, not on the main ring. You check his old toolbox yet? Bottom drawer, under the false panel." I drove straight home and found the box tucked in the back of my attic. I hadn't opened it in over a decade. The bottom drawer was stiff, but I forced it open and found a small brass key wrapped in oilcloth. Tied to it was a note, barely legible from years of dust and age. If it breathes, do not answer it. If it calls you by name, it's too late. I stared at that note for a long time. Alan had known. He hadn't just resealed that tomb. He'd fought to keep something in, and now it was calling me by name. Back at the cemetery, I tried asking my current supervisor, Dale, about any history with the mausoleum. At first he shrugged it off. That place has been quiet forever. Nobody goes in. You know the stories. But later, as we walked the grounds near closing, he said something strange. You ever wonder why we never put a camera facing the east section? I looked at him, confused. Budget cuts. He shook his head. No, that's the excuse. Real reason. Back in 1993, a tech tried wiring a motion sensor in there. Fried the system. Cameras went dark. Every time we tried again, something would kill the power. He stopped walking and looked straight at me. Whitmore, I'm gonna say this once. If you feel it breathing behind you, don't turn around. It wants you to look. That night I didn't sleep, because deep in my bones I knew Dale hadn't told me everything. He knew more. So had Alan. They all knew, but none of them ever said a word until the mausoleum whispered. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone else, someone behind all of this, whose name had been buried along with the records. I had to find out who the 13th space had been reserved for. Not just what, but who. If the living weren't talking, maybe the dead still could. I went back to the mausoleum during daylight, something I hadn't dared do in weeks. I brought bolt cutters, gloves, and a crowbar. Not to desecrate, but to understand. I wasn't trying to break in. I was trying to protect myself. Inside, the light revealed things I hadn't noticed at night. Scratches around the seal of the 13th chamber. Not from tools, not from animals, from fingernails. Long, deep gouges in the stone, as if someone or something had tried to claw its way out. Or in. I focused on the brass circle embedded in the front, cleaned away decades of grime. That's when I saw it, etched faintly beneath the oxidized surface, almost invisible unless caught at the perfect angle of sunlight. E. Brenning, 1936. Voided. Voided. Why would a burial marker be voided? I didn't understand until I compared the family tree in the old logbook again. There was no E. Brenning listed. Not under births, not under deaths, not anywhere. They had been erased. Deliberately. I returned to the town archives that evening, using the key Clara had given me to access the old pre-digital family registries, page after page of birth records, marriage certificates, until I found it. Eleanor Brenning, born 1902, died 1936. Cause of death: unknown complications during psychiatric evaluation. A small note scrawled in the margin: institutionalized at Millfield Sanatorium. See attached. There was no attachment. I dug further, found a report from the sanatorium's final year of operation. Most patients had been relocated, but a very few, were listed as unclaimed or privately interred. Eleanor was one of them. The report didn't list a body transfer, but it did mention one final event, dated the exact day of her recorded death. Containment protocol initiated. Subject to entertained 4-1 then 3B. Psychotic symptoms coincided with documented eclipse. Family requested discretion. Burial handled internally. I knew that number. The 13th space. The one sealed twice. The one with the breathing behind the stone. Eleanor Brenning wasn't just a forgotten family member. She was the reason the mausoleum existed. And someone, maybe her own family, had tried to erase her completely. After learning about Eleanor, everything started to shift, like the world I'd been living in had only been half-formed until now. and the missing pieces were finally snapping into place. But what terrified me most was that I hadn't found her by chance. She had led me to. That night, I returned to the mausoleum. Not out of duty but because I had to. I needed answers. I brought the brass key from Alan's toolbox, and the voice recorder, just in case. It was 2 a.m. when I entered. Windless. Silent. The cemetery felt like a photograph, still and lifeless. But watching inside, the chill was immediate. Not like air conditioning or a winter draft. It was wet. Ancient cold. Like opening a door to the bottom of a lake. I stepped to the center of the chamber. The 13th crypt was waiting. I knelt before it and placed the recorder gently on the floor. Then I did something I still can't explain. I pressed my hand to the brass circle and whispered, "Eleanor, what do you want me to see?" I don't know what I expected. Maybe nothing. Maybe more whisper. Instead, the lights shifted. My lantern flared, not brighter but taller. The flame stretched upward like it was pulled. And in that moment, the room around me changed. I was no longer standing in stone silence. I saw her. Not flesh. Not spirit. Memory etched into the air like light against film. She stood at the center of the room. Arms restrained. Mouth open in a silent scream. Around her were men in black coats. Faces blurred. Pulling chains tight as she writhed. One of them was sealing the wall from the inside. Another held a candle that flickered blue. Eleanor's eyes found me. And she saw me. Then everything fell away. Stone collapsing. Sound rushing back. And I was alone again. My hand still on the brass seal. The recorder was no longer on the floor. It had moved. It now sat at the far end of the mausoleum, perched on top of a sealed crypt. Playing. I hadn't pressed play. From the speaker came only static at first. Then the whisper. They buried her awake. I didn't go home after that night. I drove in circles for hours, numb behind the wheel, listening to that voice on the recorder again and again. They buried her awake. Every time I heard it, something inside me cracked a little more. The next morning, I went to the cemetery office. Dale was already there, sipping his usual thermos coffee like nothing in the world had changed. I watched him for a moment from the hallway. Just watched his calm, his routine, his damn clipboard. "Hey Tom," he said. "Rough night." I nodded, unsure how much to say. But I had to try. "You ever hear of Eleanor Brenning?" His eyes froze. Just for a second. Barely a blink. "Nope," he said too quickly. "Name doesn't ring a bell." But it did. I pressed him, told him about the missing burial logs. The voided entry. He kept brushing it off with that infuriating half-smile of his. But the more I talked, the tighter he gripped his pen. His knuckles turned white. "You should let it go," he finally said. His voice too calm. "Some things in this place aren't meant to be dug up. Like Eleanor." He looked at me then. Really looked. Not annoyed. Not tired. Afraid. "You think I haven't heard the whispers?" he said. "You think I haven't seen the damn door breathe? I was here when they resealed it in '85. I helped Alan. We poured the resin, bolted it shut, said the words they told us to say. I know what's in there. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want it to know your name too." He stood up, slammed the thermos shut, walked to the window and stared out at the mausoleum in the distance. "She was dangerous, Tom. Not evil. Not at first, but they kept her down there too long. She went somewhere else, brought something back with her." Then he turned and said something that chilled me more than anything I'd heard so far. "Alan didn't die in his sleep. That's what we told everyone. But I found him, Tom." Face frozen in terror, mouth full of soil. He paused, voice low. He tried to open it again. Dale had kept this secret for decades, helped bury the truth, and now that truth was pressing against the walls of the 13th crypt. Remembering names, waking up, and I was next on its list. That night, I returned to the mausoleum, one final time, not because I wanted to, but because I felt it calling. The pressure in my chest had been growing all day, a weight that made it hard to breathe, like my lungs weren't just mine anymore. like I was carrying something else, something that wanted to go back. The door groaned open before I even touched it. No key, no bolt. It was waiting. Inside, the air was wrong, heavier, wet. The lantern barely worked, flickering violently no matter how many times I relit it. I set it down and stepped into the center of the chamber, and the door slammed shut behind me. Hard. I turned hard, hammering, and ran to it, but the bolt was already drawn. Not by me. I hadn't touched it. I yanked, pulled, pounded. Nothing. I was locked in. Then came the sound. Not a breath. Not a whisper. A voice. Guttural. Broken. Like lungs that hadn't spoken in years, trying to remember how. It came from the 13th crypt. He came back. You brought him. The seal glowed faintly. That same brass circle now pulsing with sickly yellow light from underneath. Like there was fire behind the stone. Then the walls began to sweat. I don't know how else to describe it. Moisture, thick and dark, started leaking down from the seams between the stones, black and warm like old blood. It smelled sweet at first, then rancid, then like something long dead had exhaled directly onto my skin. I backed away, but the floor beneath me shifted. No, breathe. The entire mausoleum seemed to inhale once, a slow, drawn-out gasp that made my ears pop. The crypt's front plate cracked, a fracture, small but widening, splitting the brass seal. From inside came a soft, wet scratching, nails or fingers or bones on stone. The lantern exploded. Glass and oil splashed across the ground. I screamed more from instinct than anything, and staggered into the far wall, scraping my shoulder. And then I felt hands on me, not grabbing, not pulling, just rest, as if something behind me had laid cold fingers on my spine and leaned in close. Open it, Thomas. You already did. The pressure in my chest returned, sharper this time. My breathing stopped. My body locked. I don't remember falling, just the sound of the crypt cracking wider, and something moving inside it. When I woke, the door was open. It was dawn. The mausoleum was empty, but on the floor, written in that same black liquid, smeared across the stone, "He wears your name now." After that night, I didn't go back to work. I didn't go home. I stayed in a motel 2 towns over, too scared to sleep, too afraid to close my eyes and dream of that voice. My lungs still felt tight, like I was breathing for someone else. But no matter how far I ran, I could feel it following. Not a ghost, not a curse. Something worse, an obligation. Like something had been passed to me when I touched that seal. Like the stone itself had named me its keeper. I tried to walk away. I really did. But the dreams wouldn't stop. Every night I'd see her face. Eleanor's watching me from inside the crypt, her lips moving soundlessly, her fingers tapping against the sealed wall, asking me to finish what was started, to do what no one else had the courage to do. I went back to Clara Hart, Ellen's widow, desperate for answers. She was waiting for me. "I knew you'd come back," she said. "You've got the mark now." "What mark?" She touched her chest. "It's not on your skin. It's in your debt. You saw her. You heard her. That means she knows your soul. Now she's waiting." Clara led me to a small box under her bed, an old shoebox wrapped in twine. Inside were yellowed pages, folded letters, a dried white rose, and at the bottom a handwritten journal. Ellen. It detailed everything. How the Brenning family had sealed Eleanor away in secret, afraid of what she was becoming. How the sanatorium's doctors had warned of unprovoked possession episodes. How Eleanor began speaking in other voices, men's voices. One of them claimed to be Thomas R. Whitmore, a name she'd never known in life, a name I carried. Ellen wrote about how they sealed her away in that 13th crypt, alive. How she screamed and begged and cursed as the final stone was set. He never forgave himself. Said the guilt followed him like a second shadow. And in the final entry, written 3 days before his death, Ellen wrote, "She told me he'd return. Same name, same lungs, same bones. He'd have to choose what I couldn't, finish it, or join her." I closed the book and knew what I had to do. I had to go back, not to open the crypt, to seal it forever, not with stone, but with myself. I returned to the mausoleum on the 13th night. The cemetery was silent, suffocating in fog. The air felt thick with memory, like every soul buried here had turned to water. I carried nothing but Ellen's journal, a length of chain, and a flask of old lamp oil. I wasn't sure which I'd need most. The mausoleum's door opened without resistance, the hinges groaning like something disappointed to see me return. Inside, the 13th crypt was wide open. The seal lay shattered on the floor, split into jagged brass fragments like broken teeth. The chamber beyond it was dark, deeper than it should have been. No body, no coffin, just a narrow stone stairwell that spiraled down far beneath the cemetery's foundation. It hadn't been just a crypt, it had been a containment. I stepped inside. The descent was slow, the steps slick with condensation, the walls pulsing faintly like something alive. The deeper I went, the louder the sound became, a rhythmic wet breathing, slow and shallow, like lungs trying to remember how to be human. At the bottom I found the heart of it, a chamber no larger than a root cellar, carved from the bedrock, lit by nothing, yet not dark. In the center stood a stone altar, and chained to it was me, or something that looked like me. Same face, same eyes, but twisted, pale, hollow-cheeked. Its mouth opened as I stepped forward. Finally, it whispered, "I've been waiting to come back." I understood then. This was no haunting. This was a replacement. Every few generations, it called someone with the right name, the right shape, the right soul. It waited until the seal weakened, then tried to trade places. Ellen had resisted. I had almost helped it. But now I knew what it wanted. It wanted out. And I was the door. "No," I said. "Not this time." I pulled the flask from my coat, poured the oil around the altar, then took Alan's lighter, still in his old box, and sparked it. The chamber flared to life. The thing shrieked, not in pain, but in hunger. It reached for me as I backed up the stairs, flames licking the stone, smoke chasing me like a living hand. I reached the mausoleum door just as the seal in the floor slammed shut behind me. The crypt's entrance collapsed inwards, stone folding like paper, the circle of brass reforming on the wall. Whole again. Eleanor's voice, distant and tired, echoed one last time. "Thank you." The fire burned low and cold, not a blaze of destruction, but a kind of cleansing, silent, almost reverent. The mausoleum sealed itself before my eyes. The air snapped shut, as if the very cemetery had exhaled for the first time in decades. But I didn't feel relief. I felt empty. The thing that had worn my face, breathed in the dark, whispered my name. It hadn't screamed. It hadn't begged. It had smiled, and that haunted me more than anything else. Back at the groundskeeper's office, I checked the cemetery map. Section C, row 15. I don't know why I looked there. Maybe because of the dreams. Maybe because of the roses I kept finding on my doorstep each morning. Since that night, white, always fresh, always tied with gray ribbon. That space was no longer empty. According to the digital records, someone had been buried there 5 days ago. Eleanor Brenning. I never authorized it, never signed off. But the paperwork was clean, stamped, approved. Even showed my name as efficient. I called the county to investigate. They had no record of Eleanor Brenning ever being declared deceased. No death certificate, no family contact, nothing. And yet, her grave was real. I visited it that evening. The earth was undisturbed, the stone was clean, but I swear to God, the air smelled like wax and old roses, and I could still hear the faintest sound. Breathing from underneath. It's been 3 weeks since that final night. I've tried to move on, taken leave from the cemetery, unplugged the landline, stopped answering calls from the county office, but silence doesn't help. If anything, it makes things louder, because every night, just before I fall asleep, I hear the voice again, not in my ears, but inside my lungs. "You sealed it, but I breathed through you." I haven't told anyone what really happened. Not Clara, not Dale, not the diocese. They wouldn't believe me anyway. The official report says the crypt was damaged during renovation, then sealed for safety. They moved a fake headstone to Section C. They made it tidy, respectable, but I know the truth. And now, I think Eleanor does too. Whatever she was, victim or vessel, she never wanted this. She was a girl buried alive in every sense, silenced by fear, locked away by men who thought they were doing the right thing. She deserved better. I gave her rest. At least I hope I did. But sometimes when the wind shifts just right, I smell wax and roses, and I wake up gasping, with dirt in my throat and cold fingers clenched around my chest. The mausoleum door is sealed, but I'm still breathing. And I don't think I'm the only one. Some nights I drive back to Millfield Cemetery. I don't go inside. I don't walk the grounds. I just park on the ridge, overlooking the eastern section. The old part, where the yew trees grow in crooked rows, and the wind never really stops moving. I watch the mausoleum from a distance. Even in the dark, I can see it. The silhouette is unmistakable now. I know every stone, every angle, every breath that once rose from inside. They say cemeteries are peaceful places, full of rest, memory, but there's nothing peaceful about knowing a door once whispered your name. I dream of Eleanor sometimes. She doesn't speak. She just stands by the 13th crypt, looking up at the stars through the broken dome, as if she's still trying to remember how it felt to be seen. I think I helped her, but I can't help myself, because ever since that night I've been having dreams that aren't mine. A white room, a candle burning low, a door with no handle, and someone behind it wearing my face. Every morning I wake up and check the mirror. So far it's still me, but I leave the window open at night now, just in case he's still looking for a way out.